are Heather and Paul Christie.
And for over 12 years, we've worked with executives and entrepreneurs to accelerate change in every aspect of their business.
Because we are in the fastest paced business environment that anyone has ever seen before.
So join us for the Evolve to Win show. Welcome to another Evolve to Win show with Heather and Paul.
Today we are talking about methodologies, which is a fancy way of saying we want to talk to you about your motivators, your hidden motivators when it comes to systems and structure. So this is part 3 in a 7-part series about your hidden motivators. And our hidden motivators are what propel us to take action. It's the why we do what we do. So what's really interesting is until you actually really get in touch with your motivators, what we do is we tend to think that other people are motivated the same way we are.
Yeah, because they're hidden.
They're hidden. So you don't know about them.
So you can't actually see them. So you can see how people act, but you don't know what motivated them to actually take that action.
Yeah.
And so because we have our own internal motivators that drive us to action, we believe that everyone else is motivated by the same things that we are.
So let me give you an example as it relates to methodologies. So we're going to call this one methodologies. And again, it has everything to do with rules and systems and structure and procedures. If I were to say everybody needs to have systems, that would be a mistake. Because not everybody needs systems. But let's talk about what it's like at work. Do you work in an environment that's heavily procedure-oriented, where you've got a lot of rules and structure and systems and procedure? You have a step-by-step manual for how to do every task. Or do you work in an environment where it's completely like open and it just flows and you kind of get to do things your own way and you can do it differently all the time? This, like the way that you relate to that and how you value methodologies, it's different for everyone. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to do the spectrum thing again. Okay. So Paul is going to be on one side of the spectrum and he's going to be someone who's very structured, right? So what does it mean to be very structured?
So somebody who's very structured is always looking for the procedures, the policies, the rules, the regulations, interested in following manuals, step by step, more organized in a process.
Like a tested and proven system that actually exists, not just in the ether, but there's actually a manual.
Right.
Okay. So that's someone who's on one end of the spectrum. All the way over there is someone who's structured. I'm going to play somebody who's very receptive. So someone who's very receptive, I still value methodologies, but I value them in a different way. What I value is I value new and different ways of approaching a task. I like to do it a newer, better way wherever possible. So if I bump into a system that looks to me like it's not the best system, I'm going to look for ways to innovate it, to change it, and to make it even better. So that's somebody who's on the other end of the spectrum that we'll call receptive. So let's just talk about a really practical scenario. So we're in an office environment, and let's just say we're talking about a sales process. Someone who's very structured is going to be looking for what in the sales process, Paul?
A step-by-step how to sell. So what's first step? What's the second step? What are some of the objections? What are some of the closing lines? It's just a step-by-step process that shows me exactly what you want me to do.
Excellent. Okay. And in that step-by-step process that you really want and that you really need to be effective, you also want to have scripting as part of the step-by-step process,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So when it comes to common objections, you'd like to see the objection. You'd like to also see, well, how would I respond to this objection? What are the words that I would use? And you'd want to make sure that you used the right information when responding to any objection.
Right.
Right. Okay. So that's somebody on the structured side. Someone who's on the receptive side when it comes to sales, I'm probably going to be looking for new and different ways to have these sales conversations, whether or not there's a formal system in place. So the thing about someone who's receptive is that they may or may not follow the system that's in place, they may use some of the steps, but if they think that they could do something just a little bit better, they're going to maybe take the liberty, right, of modifying the steps here and there. So what's really interesting about someone who's receptive is that they are known to be people who will promote change, right? That's the positive side.
Mm-hmm.
What's the drawback? Well, there are a few, right? Someone who's receptive might lack a little bit in consistency, right? Because everything looks different. There's nothing that's same. It's always like, ooh, what if we tried this? And what if we tried this? And sometimes if you're really receptive, you might make changes just for the sake of changes, not necessarily because they're good changes.
Right. And what drives, so let's talk a little bit about how this comes off in the real world.
Okay.
So somebody who's structured like myself, I don't understand how is it possible that you function without structure? Like, how do you do it without having these procedures in place to just be able to follow along? And where it looks to me as if you're just winging it.
Yeah.
But you get great results. And then to get good results or great results, need to have, like, it's so important to have those step-by-step rules, procedures, policies, manuals in place for me to be able to just follow along so that I can be shown the roadmap of how to get there.
Yeah. And for someone like me on the receptive side, I look at someone who's structured as so in the box that, well, what if you have a system that's kind of antiquated? Because it happens all the time. We're in high growth organizations, right? So when you have growth, by virtue of having growth, you have change and the systems should change. And so sometimes I might look at someone who's structured and say, you're totally stuck in the old way of doing things. So let's bring it current and let's move and change a little bit. Let's innovate. Let's look at how we can make it better. And I look at somebody who's structured and they think, how is it possible that you could do the same thing over and over and over the same way and not get bored with it? Right?
Yeah, but somebody who's structured loves that. That's like totally aligned with who they are and what they need. So it's almost a requirement to have that to be able to function properly.
Yeah. And then, so I want to come up with another real life example. And this one's really cool because until we truly understood our hidden motivators, I never got this one. We used to be part of a franchise organization, great franchise organization called Action Coach. And they had a system in place. And one of the things that I found about myself as a leader in that organization is that I really, really struggled following the system. And in fact, I had to make myself commit to following the system because I knew that I was having so much trouble following the system. I wanted to keep innovating and doing it different ways and let's try this and let's try that because I'm a receptive style, but I never understood why I butted up against the system as much as I did. Now, what's interesting is we had a coach at one point, do you remember this? And she made us go through the 13-step sales process that they had. It was excruciating for me. She made me go step by step and tell her why every step was important. Well, she must have recognized in me that I was someone to kind of push back on the system. And she made me like week after week after week go through and tell her why we did each step. Well, come to find out, it was a hugely valuable exercise because once I understood the why behind the step that was created, even if I modified a little, which of course I still did, I understood why that step existed. And someone like me who's receptive, we tend to be so fast to dismiss systems that we don't really think strategically about why the different components, the different steps of a system exist. So it's really powerful. If you happen to relate to me and you know that you like to do things all kinds of different ways and not necessarily follow a structured system, really recognize the limitations that you might be facing if you don't understand the why behind the steps of the system. And especially when a system has been proven, there's something to be said for a proven system. So how about you on the structured side when it comes to franchise systems?
Well, in the part, because I'm not fully structured.
Right. You're playing the part.
Yeah, I'm playing the part right now, but somebody who is all the way on the structured end of the continuum is going to follow that system all the way. And they're probably going to have success with it, because if they believe that the system works and if they follow it and they follow it to the T, they're going to have success.
Yes.
And there are, I mean, especially some of the older franchises, more seasoned ones that have been around for a long time, have great processes in place that and systems in place that you really should follow in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because it's usually why a lot of what we've seen franchisees fail, because they don't follow the system right off the bat.
That's right.
They feel like they can change it right away.
And they can do it better.
Yeah. But I think about, receptive versus structured. There's some judgment that comes along with that as well.
Definitely.
So, somebody who's structured, and you can imagine there's a lot of behavioral styles and careers that really kind of, the structured fall into, and a lot of it is like architecture, engineering, accounting. A lot of these people are highly structured people because that's just who they are, and they fall into those particular careers because that is exactly what's needed. They need that structure. The type of work needs structure. And what happens though is that a lot of times when that structured person runs into a receptive person, especially in a work environment, there can be some prejudgment going on, like, how can this person make decisions without having like a process in place, a system in place, having just rolling out, just spitballing things and just putting it out there, and then not really ever following up with having any type of, structure in place, whatever they've said or they've made a decision on.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult. And so it's easy for somebody who's structured to look at the person who's receptive and say, they're kind of doing it wrong.
Yeah.
How can they do this? How do they expect people to be able to follow along with them if they don't give them a roadmap on how to do it?
Yeah. And the receptive person, meanwhile, is looking at the structure, making judgments as well. Because of course, if you're not doing it the way I see it, that way might be wrong, right? And so I might look at someone who's structured and see them follow the step-by-step. But we all know when it comes to systems, there's an 80-20 rule of thumb, which is 80% of what we do can be systemized and 20% needs to be humanized. And so I've seen people who are really structured where they follow the system and then there's no answer for, well, what if this happens? And so they do nothing because it's not in the system. And so the receptive person is thinking, well, just use your common sense and do what's right. But if it doesn't exist in the system, someone who's very structured literally could get mechanical in following the step by step. So,
and that's not bad if you're an airline pilot. Like you want your airline pilot to be very structured. You want them following the checklist.
Yeah, you want checklists. You want your surgeon to be extremely structured. You do not want a receptive surgeon.
You want your cruise ship captain being very structured.
That would be good.
Yeah.
And by the way,
I haven't checked the maps in a while, and we're headed into a hurricane, so they wouldn't know. They just fly by the seat of our pants.
Yeah, why not?
But especially, I think airline pilots, especially like that movie Sully. What is that? What it was? Sully.
Yep.
Yeah. How his experience and his, how they used the checklist, immediately. How long it took them to figure out, that they weren't going to be able to land in the airport, and going through their whole system and structure on what they needed to do. But then he had to really use his experience. But
yeah, that's a
interesting
cool example. Yeah. All right. So hopefully as you're listening to us talk, you're really thinking about what this means for you and what side you tend to lean toward. If you're really relating to one or the other spectrum, it's end of the spectrum that we talked about, you could be structured or receptive. If it just sort of depends on the situation, you might be somewhere a little bit more neutral and in the middle. But what's most important is that you recognize who you are and how you relate to methodologies. Are you someone who really needs systems and structure? Or are you someone who really can thrive in more of a chaotic environment? Now, one last thing I want to mention is that it's very common in small business that entrepreneurs are more on the receptive side. You kind of need to be at first because you've got so many things you're juggling. But what happens is for any type of sustainable growth, systems and structure really need to be present because you have a whole mix of people and different people need different things.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a big mistake would be to take someone who's really receptive and put them in charge of creating the policy manuals,
Mm-hmm.
because that's not their flow. It's not their jam. So you want to find somebody who's more on the structured side to really put together those policy manuals, to put together those systems. And, systems really need to be easy to use. So make sure that if you get someone who's very structured putting those manuals together, that they don't go nuts with the details. Make sure that you take what they have and you bring it up to a high enough level that might even be followed by somebody who's not structured.
Good topic today.
Yeah, it was
That was
fun
part
today.
3. We're going to go into part 4, the hidden motivators, driving forces, and we're going to be covering utility. And that's all about either resourceful or selfless. And so we'll get into that. So thank you for joining us for another Evolve to Win show. We hope you like this. If you did, please share it.
And if you haven't connected with us yet, please go to heatherchristie.com, sign up for our leadership list, and we look forward to connecting with you there.